We commonly think of police corruption as the cop on the take, the officer who accepts bribes in order to look the other way, to protect somebody in the criminal lifestyle, the officer who robs a drug dealer and takes their money. But actually there are a couple of different forms of police corruption. And maybe the most serious form of police corruption are those officers who misuse the power of their office, not so much for personal gain, but in order to deprive somebody else of their personal liberties, of their constitutional rights. The officers who use excessive force are engaging in police corruption. The officers who stop people without reasonable suspicion, who arrest people without probable cause, the officers who conduct illegal searches, the officers who mislead courts or judges in order to gain convictions, the officers who lie on police reports or look the other way when one of their fellow officers does that thing. And it's a rare thing. It's a rare thing among police officers. The vast majority of police officers do a good, honest job. But those few officers who engage in that kind of activity create an atmosphere, or at least a public perception, that police officers in general are corrupt. The other form of police corruption, of course, is that type of corruption that we're all used to, or that we all think of. Again, the officer who accepts something that they're not supposed to accept, the officer who uses their position for their own personal gain. Now, how does police corruption occur? Well, police corruption occurs in a lot of different forms and a lot of different variations. The officer who accepts a free cup of coffee, is that a form of corruption? Well, what about the officer who accepts a free meal from some restaurant, who likes to have a squad car parked in front of their restaurant, or maybe it's a business owner who wants the police to answer just a little bit quicker when he has a problem in his place of business. And if it's not a free meal, well, maybe they get a discount when they're buying some goods. Maybe they can buy a car a little cheaper. Is that corruption? You get my point here. There's a spectrum of corruption. Some of it, a lot of it, not terribly serious, but it all has the possibility of leading people down the road to more serious things. Some departments have very strict policies regarding police behavior. Others do not. Others are more relaxed about it and judge things on a case-by-case basis. And some departments have their own informal policies and their own informal structures, what the officers believe is acceptable or unacceptable. What we can all agree on is if I make you the chief of police, the best thing you're going to be able to do in order to change your department is to hire good officers when you have the chance to hire them. And remember, all police officers are protected by unions. There are a lot of laws that protect them from termination. So it's very difficult to get an officer out of your police department without a great deal of evidence and without a great deal of effort. On the other hand, hiring a new police officer is your opportunity to make a long-term change in your department. There are a couple of terms that I want you to keep in mind, terms we need to define. First of all, the first issue is discrimination. I want to define this term carefully because discrimination is different than racism or sexism. Um, Police officers can have biases against all kinds of people. They can have a bias based on sex, on gender, on race, on sexual orientation. They can have biases against people who have disabilities. But holding a bias by itself isn't discriminatory. The distinction is that discrimination is acting on that bias. In other words, if I have a view of people who, let's say I had a view of people who have tattoos, and I believe that people who have tattoos are somehow more likely to be involved in criminal behavior. Well, I shouldn't have that bias. I shouldn't have those thoughts. But if I have those thoughts or that bias and never act upon them, I'm not discriminating. If I treat everybody the same, whether they have tattoos or not, I'm not discriminating against anybody. I might be thinking about them as I'm dealing with them, but as long as I treat them the same, I'm not discriminating against them. Discriminating is the acting upon bias, making a decision based upon the biases that you hold, treating people differently based upon the biases that you hold. That's discrimination. The second is racial profiling. Racial profiling is when, in fact, law enforcement decisions are made on the basis of race or ethnicity. An example of discriminatory law enforcement. There are, however, and I use the definition that's contained in your text, but I want to be careful here because there is racial profiling that is conscious racial profiling, and there's also another maybe more insidious form of racial profiling that would be an institutional racial profiling. That institutional racism. And let me give you an example of that. If for example, you're a police officer and after a number of years you realize that every time you arrest a person who has assets, a person of wealth or influence, that they give you a hard time. They hire expensive lawyers. They drag you through a lot of court proceedings. They make you look bad, maybe. After a while you make a conscious decision. I'm just not going to bother with those people. They're too much trouble. They cost me too much time and money. Well, you haven't made that decision on the basis of any bias you have based upon race or ethnicity. But look at this. If those people of wealth come from a single ethnic group or predominantly from a particular ethnic group, well, then you are subtly discriminating against everybody else because you're still going to arrest those poor people driving beat up cars. You're still going to arrest the average working guy on his way to his job. You're going to, and that could disproportionately affect certain races or certain ethnic groups. So again, racial profiling are this institutional racism isn't necessarily a thought out plan, and it often doesn't even stem from a racist belief on behalf of the officer. Of course, we have those types of corruptions, accepting bribes from people who break the law, accepting bribes from businessmen who want to break on some ordinance violation, some public health code issue, accepting money in exchange for doing your job, embezzling money. Let me ask you this. If I make you chief of police and you use your position to help your family member, a cousin or a nephew, get a job with your department. You're a hero in your family, but is it a form of corruption if that family member is not the best candidate for the job? That act of nepotism, is that in fact a form of corruption because you are maybe not enriching yourself, but you're enriching a family member, somebody else, by this act that damages you, that may damage your department? You know, a lot of people say, well, the way to remedy police corruption, prosecute police, send them to jail, impose a fine, take away their badge, sue them. The problem with all of those remedies is those are punishments for corruption that's already occurred. They're punishments for bad acts that have already been done. Maybe we need to look at a more positive way of dealing with police corruption. Training police officers. Training police officers better. Give them training in ethics. Impose rules upon them and enforce those rules. Hire better police officers in the first place. Let's make some effort to change the behavior of the small minority of police who actually are engaged in these types of corrupt activities. Well, as you know, you have an assignment. Your assignment requires you to write a policy that deals either with police abuse of power, or excessive use of force, or police corruption. I'm looking forward to reading those at the end of the week. Again, if you have any questions, a couple of you have reached out to me and told me you were having problems with this recording. I hope this resolves it. I've tried to update it. Reach out to me with whatever issues you have. I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. I'll see you soon.